You are listening to Eating for Eden, Episode 1. When it comes to doing something about climate change, your food choices matter. Thanks for tuning in to Eating for Eden, a podcast that takes a food-first approach to climate action. I'm your host, Jessica J. Schroeder, and I am passionate about food that tastes good and does good. I'll guide you with practical tips and help you thoroughly enjoy your food along the way. It's encouraging when something can be both a problem and a solution. Wait, what? Initially, this may seem counterintuitive. Problem and solution? Our brains tend to like binaries. They want to stick to either ors. So how do we square this both and? Well, something may start out as a problem, but have the potential to become the antidote, the solution. In such cases, where this is possible, typically all we need to do is change the way we use or interact with that thing, shifting it from being problematic to being beneficial. This is a hopeful thought. Here on Eating for Eden, we gather to talk about the impact that food has on planetary health. Plus, I'm a bit of a nutrition nerd, so we'll likely touch on human health along the way too. Today, we'll explore how food is a major part of the problem of global warming and how we can flip the script to make food into a solution to reduce the effects of climate change. Perhaps you're already aware that food is a big part of the problem, or maybe this is news to you. Regardless, I hope we all walk away with the encouraging truth that our food can be part of the solution. If you care about how climate change is affecting this beautiful garden we call home, you'll be encouraged to know that as large of a problem as food has been and is for its contributions to climate change, it is also a powerful way, and perhaps the easiest way, for individuals, families, and communities to make an impact. This notion of a problem becoming a solution is particularly encouraging for something like food because, 1, we need it to survive, and 2, food is pleasurable. In other words, we need food and we like food. So finding ways to turn this problem into a solution will enable us to continue to feed ourselves well and enjoy doing so. To better understand food as part of the problem, let's look at how food is part of the climate crisis. There are multiple ways that food is part of the problem. Some have to do with how food is grown, raised, and produced. Others have to do with food waste. From a 30,000-foot view, food in general accounts for about 26% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a full quarter. Food. Most of those emissions, 77%, are from the food we eat. And the other, 23%, is due to food waste and loss. That means that there are things that we can do both about the food we eat and what doesn't get eaten in order to reduce our carbon footprint. Zooming in, let's get more specific about how food is part of the problem. And again, a whopping 26% of the problem. By far, the largest contribution food is making to climate change is methane production and release. This comes from several sources, but the biggest offender is livestock, especially cows. According to the Carbon Almanac, of the total emissions from food production, about 61% are due to livestock raised for meat and dairy. Let that sink in for a moment. Of all the kinds of food on offer at grocery stores and restaurants alike, well over half of food-based emissions come from just these two animal-based categories, meat and dairy. Another contributor is food waste, rotting in landfills. While many of us may expect that rotting food can just become compost and return to the soil, this doesn't happen in an environment where food waste is surrounded by plastic rather than organic matter. So instead of turning into compost and nourishing the ground, food waste in a landfill just sits there rotting, emitting harmful methane gas. I keep talking about methane. What's the big deal, you may be asking? I thought CO2 was the problem. Yes, and greenhouse gases are the problem. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. Like CO2, it traps heat from the sun, causing the sun's rays to warm the planet. And although methane doesn't stick around in the atmosphere for as long as CO2 does, methane's heat-trapping potential is 84 times that of CO2 over a span of 20 years. So in a time when imminent action is needed to prevent irreversible planetary impact, tackling major methane emitters can make a huge dent in helping achieve the crucial Paris Agreement targets for limits on global warming. Yes, CO2 will stick around longer, so we still need to take action to reduce our CO2 emissions, but cutting down on methane in a big way right now will help to avoid a speedier rate of warming. This is important because climate change impacts often work as a vicious cycle. The impacts of warming have consequences that in turn make climate change worse, and on it goes. Slowing warming now, by reducing methane emissions now, is an important step to take. And it's one we can take quite easily by attending to our food choices. Again, methane is emitted both during food production and through food waste rotting in landfills. With this in mind, we can implement solutions both at the front end and at the back end of the food system and our involvement in it. Before getting to those solutions, let's consider two other ways food is part of the problem. After methane production, other major food-related contributors to climate change include deforestation and land use. These two go hand in hand. As more land is required to either graze animals or grow food to feed them in feedlots, more forests are being cleared to make this possible. And did you notice that either or? Land is needed for raising livestock for food, regardless of whether it is commercial or grass-fed. Our World in Data states that 60%, that's 60%, of tropical deforestation is due to beef, soy, and palm oil production. And before anyone rails against tofu, let me clarify that 77% of global soy is fed to livestock. Only 7% of total global soy is used for direct human consumption in products like tofu, tempeh, soy milk, and edamame. Trees are not being cut down to feed the vegans, people. Okay, so land is cleared to graze more cattle who belch out tons of methane. That much is clear. Or to grow crops to feed livestock that are not being grazed. Or to produce palm oil to stuff into ultra-processed foods and other household products. While seeing rainforests cut down is obviously a tragic thing, what does the loss of trees in itself have to do with greenhouse gas emissions? Remember learning as a kid that we, as humans, breathe in oxygen and plants breathe in CO2? Plants, trees especially, draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and store it. We call these carbon sinks. Whenever forests are destroyed, huge amounts of greenhouse gases are emitted. So not only are the practices that deforestation is making way for emitting more greenhouse gases, the very act of deforestation itself is a huge emitter. Okay, that was a lot of information. And that's only scratching the surface. I realize I probably raised a lot of questions already. And it's the goal of this podcast to provide actionable solutions. So let's move on to some practical action points. I want you to walk away with 3 simple steps you can take to reduce your carbon footprint, turning food from a problem into part of the solution. Step 1. Begin reducing how much meat you eat, especially red meat. By far, red meat is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the realm of food. In general, CO2 emissions from most plant foods are 10 to 50 times lower, 10 to 50 times lower than most animal foods. Even compared to poultry, red meat emits 10 times more greenhouse gases. And when considering plant-based sources of protein, keep in mind that red meat emits over 60 times more greenhouse gases than protein-rich soy milk. And before you freak out about meeting your protein needs, there's no need to fear. All plants contain all 9 essential amino acids. And as long as you're eating a variety of foods and prioritizing some that are higher in protein, you should have no problem. Step 2. Switch to plant-based milks instead of dairy milk. While some like to demonize almond milk for its relatively high water use, all the major plant-based milks, that's soy, oat, rice, and almond, are better options for the environment than cow's milk. Plus, almond milk still uses about 40% less fresh water than cow's milk. Let's keep things in perspective, shall we? My advice: don't overthink the choice too much. Just start with what you like. Personally, I prefer oat milk when I'm ordering a cappuccino, and I use soy milk at home. I like oat milk's taste with coffee, and I like the nutritional profile of soy milk for its use with everything else. Now that I've made those switches, I honestly don't miss the cow. I'm actually happy to avoid dairy milk. I even feel better as a result. Having given 2 steps related to food consumption, I'll close out with 1 related to food waste. Step number 3, reduce the amount of food you throw away. Be aware that this counts both at home and outside the home. When you're eating out, do you take your leftovers home with you? Do you leave things you don't want on your plate rather than asking that they be left off to begin with? At home, do you frequently forget about fresh ingredients and toss them out because they went bad? In addition to being aware of our current habits, asking what we might change, we can also implement new strategies. Eat creatively and repurpose your leftovers. For example, a bit of leftover roasted veg could be added to a soup, put on a sandwich or salad, or blended into a hummus. When grocery shopping, only buy what you need or have a clear plan to use. Finally, if you have the ability to compost, by all means, do it. For those of us without a yard, we still have options, and I'll plan to explore these at a future time, but we can certainly all start with reducing what goes into the rubbish bin in the first place. Well, that's a good start for now. As much as food may be part of the problem, it is encouraging to know that we have myriad opportunities and several meals a day in which we can start making choices to be part of the solution. And keep in mind, while it is vital to know what the solutions are, it is just as important to put them into practice. So take heart, friends. Start where you are, do what you can, and build from there. Thanks for listening to Eating for Eden. If you found this episode informative or inspiring, please consider sharing it with a friend. Climate change is an issue we all need to tackle together, so let's invite others to journey along with us as we continue the conversation and start taking action. Until next week, friends, take care.